Hi everyone, welcome to part 2, Pqp. Christy and I are here in my office today in Thunder Bay, and it's snowing outside again. And we wanted to just again acknowledge that we're on the Anishinaabe territory of Fort William First Nation, signatory to the Robinson Spirit Treaty of 1850. We have just a few comments based on all our readings. They've been very interesting to read, and certainly I learned a little bit from Sean in my area about hip hop versus pop. Pop. Anyway, just lots of different kinds of ways to communicate and lots of different methods actually. So yes, we did do a little branch out there. But we were trying to kind of keep it real and keep it focused and recognize that learning and people engage in learning through many, many modes of media and knowledge and interactions. And it was nice to have some learning just even about that genre while I was reading through.
Yeah, so Module 2 really focused really the discussion on equity and what that looks like in terms of taking a look at privilege, and each of us has some privilege in different ways. So we hope you had an opportunity through Peggy McIntosh's backpack, unpacking the backpack, to take a look at what that means in terms of how you approach your work. And the next Module 2.3 actually asked you to operationalize that and take a look at it in terms of a case study. And as you go into that was Module 2.3, as you go into Module 3, you're going to get to continue that same activity, because you're going to be creating a school vision, and you're going to talk about how that equity and inclusivity is going to permeate through your entire school culture. And that's a little more difficult than having, say, we could have done one module on equity and inclusive environments, but what we chose to do was consciously weave it throughout the entire course. And so you're practicing it regularly, because we were talking today, and I call it some equity in some ways, and privilege is you can't see, people ever say you can't see the nose for your face because it's out of your viewpoint. And some of the things in terms of equity are so ingrained and so systemic that we don't see them. And it takes someone actually explicitly pointing them out to us to sort of view it and understand. And I'll give a brief one in terms of the case study. Many of us came through school, and lots of teachers still today say things like girls and boys. So though that seems quite innocuous, and it seems very inclusive, actually.
Yes.
It's actually a binary, and it limits us to two constructs of gender, and that's boy and girl. And if you are somewhere else, or you're questioning, or you're having inquiries yourself or struggles with that, and you're not sure where you lie, and you don't lie within that binary, you've automatically excluded folks without any intent. There's no one thing I want to be real clear about: typically these kinds of language pieces and these kinds of systemic embedded privilege and embedded equity issues, we don't see them, and we don't intend to offend often, but because we haven't spent the time to think about it really clearly, about how language impacts and how space can impact, and how the way in which we go sort of through the world can impact others, then we do the offend piece.
Happy to report I have a child in grade 9, and I actually said the word boys and girls because we're talking about a division of karate. And she said, "Mom, I don't know why you have to be so binary all the time." She said, "Do you not know that that's just not the way that we use language anymore?" And she just gave me a whole long lecture. And I thought, awesome, like good for her for schooling me in that moment of regression. But really, she clearly talked about, pronouns, and she said, my teachers at my school asked the first day if we could let them know how we view what pronoun that they would like us to use in class. And so, I think that was never even a conversation in schools 5 years ago, even.
No.
And when we put this case study up, when we built this course back in 2016, so it's been 4 years. This was a case study that came out of a situation that Christy had been working through at her school. It's not all the same, but close. And in the time in the course, this was new to almost everybody, and people really had no idea what to do with it. And reading through the posts now and the case studies, and the last maybe year, a number of people have actually worked through this at their school. They've been looking at changing bathrooms. TDSB has, in particular, several documents that have had a long history as being some of the pioneering work in this area. But it's interesting just to see the change just in people taking this course over the last 4 years and their own experiences in their own schools. And, it's not a rare occurrence anymore. It's more of a normative.
Yeah. And
space.
something as simple as one of the folks in my course mentioned, really inquiring from the parent and the student what pronouns they wish to be identified by. And so even the pronouns of she or her or he, they automatically trap us into that binary again. So there's a lot of work around using, there's some internationally accepted pronouns that are gender neutral, and there's also a reassignment of they to become a singular
Yes.
pronoun rather than using it as a plural pronoun. So those are ways in which we think about language. I was reading this week about Elizabeth St. Pierre. Actually, I read her back in one of my doctoral seminars. She has an article on post-structural feminism. One of the things that she really talks about is that building your community around celebrating the differences. So your community, what unifies your community is diversity and all the differences. Rather than, if you think about it, we usually organize a school community and our community activities around what makes us the same. So, and that in of itself excludes, even if we're organizing around a construct that's not the majority construct, we're still excluding some by organizing around what makes us the same, because we're all quite diverse. Mm-hmm. So it's really complex. And I always really enjoy listening to people's responses to the case. I even learn things every time I read it, because people think of things I hadn't thought of when I went through something similar to it at that time. So I really appreciate that. And you're going to get a chance to kind of continue thinking about that as you create your vision and do some establishing culture of inquiry, and then also looking at the assessment and metrics of success. And we give you another video in there. Yeah, it's one of our favorites too. So
I think just of note, your assessment and metrics of success doesn't have to be data from your own school necessarily. No. Depending on where you are, what your interest is in the world, you can use an international measure. You can use a local measure, you can use a provincial measure or a national measure. So you don't have to particularly pick, one particular item. If you are very familiar with your own school data, just remove the name of your school on it and put it up there so that unless it's public. If it's a public EQA, then that's public for consumption. The other piece, when we have you thinking about you're creating a vision with your initial staff meeting, we just kind of are getting used to, for those of you who haven't yet run through as leading a initial staff meeting, or maybe being a new principal in a new school, that first time you come together really does set a tone. I would say similar to when you get a new classroom of children and you're building those relationships with each other. So think about how you want to communicate as a new leader in that situation. Because you may be new, you may have staff that are new to the school. For some of you, it may be, thinking about your first leadership time. Mm-hmm. In fact, in the past, we have had some people who it was their first year in a school, so they actually took their, whatever their presentation one that they used, and then they put some reflection pieces in it on things they learned after going through it that they thought about. So that, is open to you as well as an option. So we invite you to do that as well. And then you're going to come back to that a bit later when you look.
Module 5.
Yeah, Module 5. So just keep in mind under that data design, it's going to connect back to your data. Yep. So there'll be some pieces in there for you to have a look at.
And then enjoyed reading the practicums. In my group, there was one in particular that did a practicum around Unlearn. I think that was Enza. And that is an interesting poster series. I've heard of it, hadn't seen it until I read Enza's practicum. It's worth taking a look at. It's especially in talking about the equity piece, because it is about seeing that privilege and unlearning some of those things that are so ingrained that we tend not to see them. So
yeah. The other piece, and I guess for those of you that are still working through your practicum, we have had some questions about within the climate of work to rule. Mm-hmm. What does that look like? It looks like whatever you make it. Yeah. So, leadership often is not direct leadership. It's often alongside others. And so, just be keeping that in mind, that, work still occurs in any climate, and regardless of how big or small your school is. And so there was another time where we had this happening, and people had sort of like Friday evening somewhere at their place, and they would have an informal learning conversation or dialogue.
Zoom, you can use Zoom. It's free for 40 minutes. Some of you who may be using, if your board uses Office 365 or Microsoft, they have Microsoft Teams is available on Office 365, and it works just like Zoom. So some creative ways. And then if it's not going to work at all, talk to us. We're absolutely not above extending deadlines for you. So please just give us a shout if there's just not going to happen, this until the labor action's over.
Yeah. Okay. So. Otherwise, we are going to post another Zoom session for you so that we can log in. So just stay tuned. We'll put that in the news, and we just have to connect our calendars, and then we'll put it in the calendar section for you. That'll be coming up the next couple weeks, though. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you.
Have a great night.
Yep.
Bye.